I am Dr. Maite alias Maebana. Today, we are going to have a lesson on the principles of advocacy for disability. Those are my credentials. That is Dr. Maite E. Maebana, module code EDS4804 from the Department of Inclusive Education. Our lesson for today will be focused on the learning outcomes for study unit 1. And upon completion of this unit, you should be able to promote an awareness for people with disabilities to make their own decision. Secondly, identify opportunities for decision-making, self-expression, and self-advocacy for people with disabilities. Lastly, identify issues, goals, and strategies for capacity building networking. And the structure of the lesson presentation for today revolves around none other than introduction, principles of advocacy, promoting an awareness for people with disabilities to make their own decisions, identifying issues, goals, and strategies for capacity building and networking purposes. When we introduce our lesson, we start by indicating that the common denominator in the advocacy and organizational efforts of people with disabilities is the desire to eliminate discrimination by preventing the full and equal participation of people with disabilities and to establish mechanisms that would prevent the creation of new obstacles, according to Zhang 2017. And the barriers facing people with disabilities have formidable segregation, unemployment, forced non-therapeutic sterilization, while some obstacles have been removed through successful advocacy campaigns, organizations by disability community. For an example, discriminatory practices or immigration regulations. Ideas like disability lens are beginning to be developed. They are not sufficiently robust to play a strong role in the prevention of barriers. A disability lens is an analytical tool that helps policy developers explore the consequences of a public policy initiatives for people with disabilities. When looking at the principles of advocacy for disabilities, we are now going to look at the following principles. The first one, that is independence. When we speak about independence, we're saying it is the independence of advocacy that allows services to be led by and be responsible to the client. Research shows that independence is one of the key attributes that people coming to advocacy services are looking for. Secondly, we're looking at the clarity of purpose. Under the clarity of purpose, we're finding out that it is very much important that everyone knows what they can expect from an advocacy services. Providing clarity helps in the following ways. Users can evaluate the support they receive. Advocates are clear about their role and its boundaries. It is easier for appropriate referrals to be made and to ensure that funding intended for independent advocacy is used in precisely that way. Another one, we're looking at the question of confidentiality. We say confidentiality is a cornerstone of independent advocacy. It establishes a relationship of trust that enables people to tell their stories and explore the options available to them. However, confidentiality should not be a barrier to the supervision and support of advocates. It is essential that services have a clear confidentiality policy which is regularly reviewed. And it is equally important that people who come to advocacy services are given clear information about what confidentiality means and the circumstances under which it is not it will not be possible to maintain confidentiality. The other one, that is safeguarding. Under safeguarding, we say it is essential to ensure that advocacy providers and advocates are suitably knowledgeable and experienced in identifying safeguarding issues. And the third one, or the fifth one, we come into the question of empowerment and putting people first. So we say advocacy services need to be focused on the persons they are working with. One way of achieving this is to ensure that people who do or may use advocacy services have meaningfully influenced over the direction of that service. As advocacy is about increasing the amount of control that people have over their own lives. Advocacy services need to ensure that they are working in a way that fosters independence. It is important to create a culture that promotes individual empowerment and to develop methods to determine outcomes with clients and means the effectiveness of the advocacy relationship. And as we proceed, we are now going to focus on the equality, accessibility, and diversity. So now it is expected that advocacy services take proactive steps to ensure equitable and easy access to them. Having equal opportunity in accordance to policies is only part of the process. Proactive efforts must be made to implement such policies, remove barriers, and deliver accessible and equitable services. And then when getting to the issue of accountability and complaints, we say advocacy services must be held accountable for the work they do and the way they use the funding they receive. Different stakeholders can hold advocacy services to account in different ways. Funders should be able to see that the money is being spent wisely by assessing the effectiveness of the advocacy service. The service should be accountable for meeting the needs of its local community, its legal responsibilities, and adhering to agreed advocacy principles. Just as importantly, individuals should be able who expect a high quality service and should have a clear and accessible route for complaints if they are unhappy with the service provided. This must include independent support for complaints. And lastly, we're focusing on supporting advocates. Under supporting advocates, we say policies, procedures, and organizational structures count for nothing if the people delivering advocacy are not adequately trained or supported. Providing training for advocates and ensuring adequate and appropriate supervision are essential if services are to retain skilled advocates and ensure high quality advocacy for people who need it. In the interest of time, I would like to leave the rest of the principles to you as the student. You are now going to continue studying the rest of the principles on your own from page 10 of your study guide up to page 11. And then as we proceed, we are now going to look at promoting an awareness for people with disabilities to make their own decisions. In many ways, supported decision making is nothing new. The majority of people with intellectual or developmental disabilities can manage their own affairs with informal assistance and guidance from others. As young persons with disabilities approaches 18, a family feels pressured to establish guardianship, and the pressure is overt, with parents being told by professionals that they should obtain guardianship to assist the person with important life decisions. Attorneys who advise on special needs planning play a critical role in encouraging supported decision making and promoting self-determination, according to DEATH 2017. In continuation, if a family seeks to obtain guardianship over a relative with a disability, attorneys can guide them to think first about what decision-making supports could be used to help the person making his or her own decisions. There are many informal and formal ways that people with disabilities can get support and advice in making decisions. And the simplest way is by seeking the advice from family members and trusted friends. And families can work with their relatives with a disability to build a team that can provide support and guidance in making decisions. Families can also support people with disabilities by working with them to develop decision-making skills. And let's look at the tips to make successful disability awareness campaigns. Make concrete list of goals you would like to achieve. Secondly, fully research your cause. Know the facts and be ready to present them in forms of flyers or discussions. And determine your audience and divide them into different targeted groups. Or it becomes advisable to have a prominent individual as your spokesperson. Strategically plan the dates of your campaign and have a thorough grasp of your budget. And when you will be identifying issues, goals, and strategies for capacity building and working purposes, this unit puts forward 3 aims and associated criteria for community capacity building for people with disabilities to engage in and experience the arts. The first one, that is accessing cultural experience, followed by engaging in artistic expressions, and lastly, that is community engagement. Looking at the first one, we say capacity to play active role in decision-making process, etc., should be taken into account. Secondly, capacity for self-expression, capacity to access creative education, and capacity to engage in training for art practice, and capacity to be employed in art practice. Lastly, capacity to engage with and contribute to wider community through creative practice. And let's look at the question of the goals. So now the long-term goals of the project is to enable the project with disabilities in South Africa and in Africa to enjoy all their rights. And this will be done by building capacity of local organizations for people with disabilities to enable them to establish a coordinated plan of action for their sector and to provide a professional service to their members in both service delivery and advocacy. And when looking at the strategies, we say community capacity building requires a strategic approach because it's about more than just people to be present in the community. And doing an activity in a community setting does not mean people are achieving social inclusion. And a community infrastructure that is welcoming to people with learning disabilities need to be developed. And planners and managers have to engage more with the community outside the learning disability and social care world. Pointers for development, the lobbying strategy handbook. Be deliberate. Find your local training courses and community capacity building and make sure that some of your local leaders and people with disabilities go to them. Learn from initiatives being taken with other user groups and develop a unified action plan. Build the capacity of local faith communities to include people with disabilities, and supporting people into paid work is based on similar principles but focused on building micro enterprises. And then summary and conclusion. We have learned that creating awareness is of utmost importance, and the awareness should be an empowerment process for those rights are advocated. Their independence must not be infringed, and during the process of organizing the campaign, mutual trust should prevail, and the strategies should be employed must be discussed thoroughly and be agreed upon. And we find in that accountability is crucial. Funders or donors would like proper utilization of their funds donated. And these funds must be used for the specified goals of the advocacy campaign, reaching the target as indicated in the objectives. And this marked the end of our lesson presentation for today. And thank you for your time.